If You Have Nightmares, We'll Dance on the Bed by Lefay, Strent. Chapter 8. Epilogue. Sharp footsteps clipped down the corridor with purpose. Many of the castle staff made way. Most days the royal would give them the courtesy of a smile, or even stop to chat. This wasn't most days, though. Actually, this had been one hell of a month in general. Remy stalked past everyone without a glance their way. They shone on his periphery like flares of guiding light in the night. Everything gave off energy, people more than other things. Regular humans were white, each source of light fizzling and crackling in their own unique ways and shapes. Remy could tell each one apart. It made it hard to look at them and see their faces, recognize the ones who he'd grown used to seeing here for years, only to then notice the ones who were missing. Remy made it to his destination. The door to the wizard's study stood open, and voices trickled out. Logan had been more popular than Remy lately, and wasn't that a crime? "What's a guy gotta do to get you alone, babe?" Remy purred. Logan stood next to his desk, a looming aura of white nearly overshadowed by all the traces of other colors tangled in between. Another person stood with him, threads of rainbows interspersed to a lesser degree. That aura was brighter in a way that said its owner was younger than the wizard beside them. Oh, no wonder they seemed fairly young. This must be one of Logan's students. The student glanced uncertainly at Remy and back at Logan. Logan merely sucked in a breath as if he'd put a lemon in his mouth, but was resigned not to spit it out. Ignore him. Indulging his flirtations only makes him worse. "As if I could ever be ignored," Remy grinned. "But seriously, got a sec to talk, or should I come back in a bit?" Logan sighed. "No, stay. I won't be here in a bit anyway. I can't avoid the city council any longer. And before that, I need to make an appearance at the college. I've been neglecting my duties there as of late." "No one blames you, sir," the student piped in. "What with the war and all the fairies." "Fairies?" Logan asked. "Yeah, like the Fae? Or fair folk?" "It's New Age slang, Teach," Remy offered. He patted Logan's shoulder consolingly. "It's okay, you're old." Logan slapped his hand away in irritation. "My age does not make me unaware of the changing of language, and I am not old." Before Remy could make a sassy retort, Logan went on. "Oh, my apologies, Joan. Forgive me for not introducing you properly, but this is Prince Remy. Remy, this is Joan. They are the president of the senior class of apprentice wizards at that college." "Oh, the president?" Remy whistled. "You must be a big shot, up-and-coming wizard, then." "Hardly," Joan laughed, aura flaring in self-consciousness. "I'm not all that great, but there's a lot I still can't do." "Do not undersell yourself," Logan advised. "The accomplishments you have yet to make should not be valued more highly than the accomplishments you've already made. Although you could use more practice in other areas of magic, that doesn't take away from the fact that your adeptness in divination and summoning are remarkable." "Divination?" Remy asked, surprised. It was one of the harder forms of magic. He would know out of anyone. "Remy here is actually a master of divination," Logan supplied. "He is not a master of much else, however." "Rude. I mean, true, but why'd you have to say it?" "Really?" Joan asked, his aura burning with excited curiosity. Kinda reminded Remy of Thomas. "How does that work? I thought your eyes—" Remy smirked. "I use divination to see. You don't really need to see auras. You just gotta feel them. Try using a blindfold next time." "Kinky," Joan responded before they could stop themselves. Immediately their aura burst hot with shame, probably at remembering the company present. Remy burst into laughter. "You're a keeper, kid." As Joan floundered, trying to decide whether to be embarrassed or laugh with him, Logan gently ushered Joan out of the study. "Before we become any more distracted, I'll ask you to wait outside for me, Joan. I need to have a word with Remy before we leave for the college." "Oh, babe, if you wanted me alone, all you had to do was—" Logan's aura pulsed bright blue, and next thing Remy knew, a summoned magical bird flew directly at his head. He ducked just in time. "Feisty," Remy said after standing back up. Logan closed the door with a huff. "You're incorrigible. What do you need?" "A nice long bath, a steak dinner. Oh, maybe a manicure." "Enough stalling, Remy. I really don't have long to spare." Remy debated carrying on just to see how far he could push Logan's buttons. It would be a fun distraction from the shitstorm happening around them. "You really gonna leave?" Remy asked. He leaned a hip against Logan's desk, arms crossed. Logan hadn't left the castle in weeks. He'd been too afraid to. And truth be told, Remy had been afraid as well. They all had. There's no more avoiding it at this point, Logan said, although his voice sounded unbelievably tired. With Thomas's condition unchanging as of late, and with the castle's defenses increased, I must take the time while I can to tend to my other responsibilities. Responsibility. Sounds boring. You may act indifferent, but I know you put a great deal into your duties as a member of the royal family. Prove it. Remy sniffed and turned his head. Of course, Logan knew he was deflecting. It had been Remy's idea to present the castle's security breach to the public as a grave mishandling of magic. Just an accident, that's all. Logan, straightforward man that he was, loathed political cover-ups. But even he could see the reason behind this particular one. If their students knew that even the most guarded of them weren't safe in their own castle, there'd be anarchy. Where is Thomas? Logan asked, steering the conversation down another path. I thought you were watching him this morning. Is that why you needed me? I assume it's not an urgent matter due to your relaxed behavior. He's with my folks. Don't worry, Patton's with them. Remy's parents had been away the night of the breach a couple weeks ago. When they got back and heard the news, they'd held Remy and their little nephew and voiced how regretful they were that they hadn't been there for them on that night. Remy didn't want to imagine his parents witnessing that horror. Or worse, how they could have been 2 more notches in the death count. No, this isn't really about Thomas, Remy went on, plastering a half-grin on his face that he couldn't feel. Just wanted to give you a heads up about Roman. He got summoned. What? When was this? To where? Why wasn't I informed of this? Happened late last night. He got word from Aliford. Things are looking pretty hairy there, apparently. Logan knew what that meant. Aliford, once a rich and thriving tourist city, had become a stronghold near Selbion's borders, next to the forests of the Lefay. As the Lefay had encroached on the kingdom's territory and picked off the surrounding farm villages, Selbion's army had stationed itself in Aliford before they could get any further. Aliford used to be a pretty place. Remy remembered traveling there many times with his parents as a kid. Vendors lining the streets, performers putting on shows, the smell of pumpkin pies they were known for wafting through the air every year during autumn. Now, soldiers came back from there and spoke of what a nightmare the city had become. A thoughtful silence filled the room, both of them worried for their friend. Every time he went back into battle was another time that he might not come back. It must have taken a figurative crowbar to pry him away from Thomas, Logan said, an attempt at levity. Remy laughed. Yeah, you should have heard him. It was all, how can I fulfill my duty to both the crown and the people when both need me? I bonked him on the head, though, so you can thank me. Told him he might as well go. He needs a distraction anyway, and Thomas ain't going anywhere, apparently. Indeed. Any updates on Thomas's condition that I should know about before I leave? You mean other than sprouting another head? Nah, not really. Logan's aura dulled marginally. Remy could tell he wasn't amused. I assume that you must be joking, and I do not find it funny. I think it's funny. It's not, considering the fact that we have no precedence for the situation we find ourselves in, and another head sprouting could well become another side effect of his deal. And oh boy, what a deal it was. Thomas would be the one to go and completely ignore all common sense and make a deal with a Fae. The gray-hued tones of everyone's auras told him before they used words. They were arguing, too distracted, couldn't get to Thomas in time. How could that Fae still be so powerful even as injured as he'd been? But their words drifted right through Remy. He couldn't stop staring at his sleeping baby cousin. The white had been shrouded in black. Remy had felt this darkness before. The shadow Fae, Verge, the one who had sworn he was only there to help, had nested inside his cousin and was eating him from the inside out. Or that's what Remy thought at first. That or the Fae had died in bequeathing the gift of his magic to Thomas. But after Thomas awoke a full 29 hours after he'd slipped into unconsciousness, the white glowed stronger, and Thomas told them what had happened. I said he could stay, Thomas murmured sleepily to them. He would be sleepy for the rest of the day before bouncing back to his usual high-energy self. I need you to clarify, Thomas, Logan said, sitting on the bed beside Thomas. The wizard had used every spell to try to identify what Thomas had become, and all they knew was that Thomas reeked of Fae essence. It seems you've made a deal with that Fae. You understand what I mean, don't you? I think so? You told him he could stay, but did you say anything else? Anything at all? Or did he say something? I don't know. I just said he could stay if he got better. I really wanted him to stay. He helped me. I wanted to help him too. That's very kind of you, Thomas, Logan conceded, but I'm afraid the Fae is no longer here. Thomas was confused. No, Mr. Verge is here. And didn't that just send a shiver down everyone's spine? He's sleeping, Thomas explained, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. When asked where Verge was currently, Thomas couldn't pinpoint exactly, only that he was definitely in the vicinity and was apparently sleeping in the dark. How do you know this? Did he tell you? Thomas laughed. He can't talk. He's sleeping. The child showed a concerning lack of concern about it all. It could have been the shock of all the trauma built up. He was only 6, for God's sake. First losing his parents and now this? But Thomas acted more adjusted than any of the anxious adults hovering around him. Thomas talked happily about all the things he'd do with Mr. Verge when the Fae woke up. He possessed Thomas, Roman said hours later when Thomas had drifted off to sleep again. He couldn't bear to be too far from the prince, not after having failed him so terribly. We all saw it happen, and Remy can see the bastard prowling around inside of him. He's a nesting parasite waiting to take him over when he has the strength. We don't know that that's what it means, Patton denied, though his aura didn't look as confident as his words sounded. Then what else could it mean, Patton? That the Fae just hitched a ride inside of him to take a nap? Don't fool yourself. He took advantage of a child's naivety, and now he's staying with Thomas. Staying until he completely takes him over or just kills him. God, I should have killed that monster when I had the chance. Shh, you'll wake him, Patton admonished. We'll figure this out, I promise. It's a good sign that Thomas was acting normal earlier, right? Logan will find something out. Until then, we just have to be there for Thomas. That's rich, coming from you. What? Be there for Thomas? As I recall, you just stood there and stared. Roman couldn't understand the complicated coil of emotions in Patton's aura, but Remy could see it. Shut up, Remy told them from where he sat at Thomas's bedside. Get out or shut up. Remy, I said shut up. As an order. Roman wisely didn't speak after that, and Patton left the room. Both of their auras curled in on themselves with shame, fear, and grief. With everything falling apart around them, and everyone questioning the right thing to do, they were all hurting and failing to see past their own failures. Remy stayed awake that night, staring at the shifting mass of black and white. He sensed the jagged edges of Roman's aura from across the room, and though the man did not make a sound, he knew the general cried. They all took shifts with Thomas over the weeks to come, though to be honest they stayed with him whenever they possibly could. Roman and Patton barely spoke to each other. Logan struggled to hold everyone together, and Remy watched his cousin for any signs of change. And there had been changes. Whenever they asked, Thomas always informed them that the Fae still slumbered, but parts of him emerged here and there. Thomas nearly tripped going down the stairs one day. Tangible shadows sprouted from his skin to catch his fall. After stabilizing him, they sank back inside. Thomas had been over the moon by the new development, while everyone else freaked out, believing the Fae to be ready to make a reappearance. No, he's still sleeping, Thomas told them. He hugged himself happily. He's just keeping me safe. Logan performed more spells with lackluster results. Remy actually tried to push his divination abilities as far as they would go, but nothing new arose. There's still 2 distinct auras, Remy reported to Logan. They're just so intertwined. There's no way we could force them apart without hurting both of them. Thomas thought they were all being silly for their seriousness. He looked at Remy at dinner that night and asked why he wasn't eating. Just worried about you, hon, Remy told him truthfully. He didn't have an appetite right now. He'd rather watch over his cousin. I'll eat later. That's dumb. You should eat now, Thomas told him and pushed his own plate across the table toward Remy. Here, you can have some of mine. And Remy nibbled on some of it because it made the child happy. Thomas smiled at him, and that wasn't something Remy had really seen in weeks. Not since his parents died and left him an orphan. Remy loved his aunt and uncle, missed them dearly, but Thomas? He'd been devastated at the news. He threw tantrums, demanded to see his parents, begged Logan to fix it, cried when nothing could bring them back. He'd been inconsolable, ignored even Remy's attempts to comfort him, and chose to sulk in his room. Now, a Fae had turned that around, and Thomas was smiling again. Remy had so many mixed feelings about this that he'd rather sleep it all away than sort them out. More incidents occurred after that near-trip episode. Thomas discovered he could see in the dark. He excitedly showed the others by getting them to shut out all the light. After a few seconds, the darkness in Thomas's aura whipped around like he was drawing from it, and Thomas's eyes began to glow softly. "That's the same color as the Fae," Patton trailed off. "His eyes were purple and green too," Logan agreed. "You should stop doing that, Thomas," Roman said. "You don't know what you're dealing with." "But why?" Thomas asked. "It could be hurting you." "But it's not. I'm just seeing in the dark." "That Fae did something to you, Thomas. Using its powers could make it worse." "He's just sharing them with me," Thomas argued. "You just don't want me using them because you don't like Mr. Verge." "Thomas," Logan spoke, drawing back the heavy curtains to let the light in once more. The darkness in Thomas's aura slithered back down, no longer needed. Roman's words do not just stem from a personal bias. That is to say, Roman isn't just saying this to be purposefully mean. We don't know the full effects of what Mr. Verge did to you, so we must be careful. Do you understand? Thomas was crestfallen. He'd come to show them his cool new powers with excited intentions, and now they were scolding him. "No, I don't understand." "Did it look like it was hurting him?" Patton asked. And it took a second before Remy realized he was being addressed. "Not really," Remy shrugged. "It just made the dark spots more active for a minute." "He's still sleeping, right, cuz?" "Mm-hmm." "I don't know what to tell you then, babes," Remy said. "I just know that I don't like this either." "Well," Patton sighed. He stood close to Thomas, petting at his hair. "How about this, kiddo? If you find out any more of these new tricks you can do, come and get one of us, okay? We just don't want you doing this alone. Can you do that for me?" "I guess," Thomas murmured, pouting. "He's not bad, honest." More spooky occurrences happened. Thomas went to go visit the horse's stable one day, something he liked to do a lot since the kid adored animals. The horses spooked as soon as Thomas got near them. They reared back on their legs, braying in what could only be terror, kicking at their surroundings. A couple of them managed to get loose as they panicked and fled. Thomas wasn't allowed to see the horses after that. At odd hours of the night, Thomas kept wanting to sneak out of his new bedroom and walk around. He would be restless until someone took him outside for a while. It wasn't until he could touch the ground barefooted that he would relax. "She talks a lot," Thomas told his older cousin. "Who?" "The Night. She talks a lot." "She?" "Yeah, I don't know." "What does she say?" "I don't know. Just a lot. It's not really like words. It's just a lot, and I can't sleep until I come talk back." On and on the instances occurred, the most frequent being the shadows coming out. Those were something Thomas claimed always happened on their own, and they were always there to help him. Unfortunately, abilities like that couldn't be looked over, and the remaining castle staff were wary of the little prince. The cooks didn't like Thomas coming into the kitchen anymore to watch them work. They said they would stay and continue to work, but only if Thomas was kept safely away from them. The maids, too, whispered whenever Thomas came around. It was their job to tend to the castle and anyone who lived there, but they took it to the next level, afraid to displease the prince in the slightest. The guards, uncertain of what the prince had become, held themselves stiffly as if ready to draw their sword on a child. They didn't see Thomas anymore. They saw a Fae in human skin. "I think they're scared of Mr. Verge," Thomas sadly confided in Remy one day. Remy didn't have the heart to tell him that he wasn't quite right. Remy sat in Logan's study, miserable and showing it only because he was alone. Logan had finally left to go to college with Joan. He seemed to regard the student highly, which was not an easy feat. "Aren't you not supposed to play favorites, Teach?" Remy had teased. "I suppose, but they've shown incredible cleverness and dedication. They possess a great deal of promise, and if events run smoothly this year, I plan to take them on as my personal apprentice." Logan had never singled out an apprentice like that. It said a lot about Joan. Remy had wished him luck and let him leave, pretending that he would be leaving right behind him. However, Remy ducked back into Logan's office once he left, and slumped down at the wizard's too large and too cluttered desk. He laid his head against the cool expanse of wood, and nudged a few papers and pencils out of place just to be a nuisance. It was nice to see Logan just a little bit happy, just a little bit back to normal. The man had been working himself to death as of late. But Remy had too. Dealing with political affairs had never been his thing, and lately he'd been swamped by it, ever since his aunt and uncle were. A lot of people wanted Remy's dad to step up and take charge. Thomas wasn't old enough yet, and next in line would be Remy's father, the brother of the former queen. But Larry was not a man fit for the political spotlight, and had been more satisfied with his sister ruling. To be honest, he'd be too soft for it, and Remy loved him all the same for it. His mom could definitely do it, but people still had problems with his dad marrying Dot, the farmhand girl. Remy could easily imagine her standing up to the city council and telling them to get their shit together. So then there was Remy, the carefree, blind prince that the people didn't really talk about without mentioning all the parties he attended. So what? Just because he had noble blood didn't mean he didn't know how to have fun, and somehow having fun was synonymous with being irresponsible. Those that knew him, though, they wanted him to become the de facto heir. Larry wouldn't unless absolutely forced. He'd leave it all up to the council until Thomas was old enough to be crowned. With those two out for the count, eyes were turning on Remy, and Remy hadn't even thrown his name up for discussion. "He should just let you rule," Remy had told Logan the other day, after the prince had come back from a very strenuous meeting with the city council. Logan had scoffed as if believing the idea to be far-fetched. But honestly, who better? Logan had his hands in so many cookie jars, literally was the sole entrepreneur for making and running the kingdom's first wizardry school. When the council wanted to initiate a draft on wizards for the Fey War, it was Logan who steered them away from utilizing them for direct combat, and towards more safer areas, like for medical, communications, etc. Not to mention he'd been an advisor to the royal family for over a decade now. The man was smart, and knew how to play in the field as if he was a politician himself. "Why not Roman, then?" Logan had suggested, deflecting the issue away from himself. "He's quickly become a household name, the hero of Selbion, or whatever they call him." "Roman's popular and good for fighting, but not much else," Remy had replied snidely. "Okay, that was kinda harsh. I admit I'm a bitch. I'll give Roman credit, but can you really imagine him as a king? He doesn't think things through enough unless it's a battlefield." "He's a good general," Logan said, which really just summed up his thoughts on Roman as king. "Fuck it, if you don't want to do it either, let's just make Patton king." "Agreed." Remy groaned into his arms thinking about it all. Too much stress. Too much yammering and nobody doing enough. He closed his tired eyes, wishing to fall asleep right there at the desk. Too many sleepless nights spent watching over his cousin. Remy had earned a quick nap, right? The door slammed open. "Is that the universe telling me no?" Remy griped. He sat up and turned around. He immediately lost the attitude and jumped up when he saw his mother standing hunched over at the doorway, shoulders heaving as she caught her breath. "Logan," she asked him. "Where's Logan?" "He left. What's going on, Ma?" "Oh, my God." Dot shook her head, a hand at her chest. Remy gripped her shoulders. "Did you run here?" Remy asked incredulously. "Where is he? We've got to— Rem, it's Thomas!" What happened?" Remy swore if that kid sprouted another creepy shadow tentacle. But this wasn't a joke. His mother gripped his wrists and looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "That Fay, the one you said in Thomas, he's back. He appeared, and Larry, your father, he wouldn't leave. Oh, Rem." Remy felt ice wash down his back, quick and without mercy. But that's how the big traumas of life often went. He didn't have time to process. They needed to move. "Where's Patton?" he demanded. "With Thomas." "Good. Logan left for the college, but you might be able to catch him in time. Grab whoever you see first and tell them to run and get him. I'll get Thomas." "What? Remy, wait!" Dot tried to grab her son, but he slipped by her. "What are you doing? Get back here!" "Just do it!" Remy called, already heading down the hall. Remy didn't wait to see if his mother followed his directions. He knew she would. Nothing was more important than her family, and Remy didn't get his clever streak from anywhere. His mom would get Logan. And Remy would get to Thomas before another tragedy could happen, simply because none of them could take any more. Patton wasn't a magic user. He didn't possess a magical bone in his body. And his body? He'd been the scrawniest kid. At a young age, he told his parents he wanted to become a knight and protect people. They thought it was silly, like the jokes he'd tell to make people he loved smile. Patton didn't have magic or a body naturally inclined for fighting, but what he did have was a whole lot of heart. He'd spent years of training to get where he stood today. He kissed the dirt more times than he could count, had cried when his limbs felt like nothing more than strapped anvils, had known utter exhaustion as if it were an old friend. But Patten got back up. Every time he fell, every time someone told him to just lay down, that he wasn't cut out for this, he rose again every time. He was recognized for his tenacity and given a position as a castle guard. To others, they mocked him for all the talks of dreams only to waste away with a cushiony guard job. But they didn't see it like Patten did. To the brave soldiers who risked their lives at the borders, to those who were sent to places like the city-turned-fortress Alaford, Patten gave his utmost respect. But home was where the heart was, and it needed protecting too. Patten wanted to protect everyone, and this was the best place he knew how to. The king and queen were gone, but Thomas remained, and the prince had all of Patten's devotion. And after the night of the Fae's infiltration on the castle, Patten had reaffirmed his belief that he was right where he was meant to be. Except, lately, he'd questioned if others weren't meant to be where they were. Patten remembered the night he'd fought alongside the Dark Fae. Mr. Verge, or so Thomas called him. You chose your allies quick in the midst of battle, and Patten always did have a knack for reading character. Verge had seemed almost normal, you know? Like Patten had always known him. Just another guard protecting the heart of the castle. He hadn't let any of the other Fae lay a hand on Thomas. And more than that, he'd made sure they hadn't gotten to Patten or anyone else as much as he could. No one else would go near Verge once he'd been downed. The Fae with the axe, his body had laid there. The other one broke away from the fight with a feral scream and ran into the night not to be seen again. A quiet didn't settle on those left behind. There had been too much crying for that, too much fear and pain. Patten took it upon himself to see to the Fae who had quite possibly saved all of them. If the axe one had killed Patten, Logan was good, but against two at once? He didn't want to think about it. He had let others see to Roman, and Logan made sense of the chaos left behind. Remy had Thomas safely with him, so Patten did his best to staunch the bleeding until someone else could take over. Fae didn't look so different from regular people when they were lying unconscious on the ground smattered in red. Verge's ears were pointed, his limbs somewhat willowy and skin too pale, but other than that, Patten just thought he looked too young to die. He'd been overwhelmed with relief when Logan agreed to keep him contained within the castle. Roman had been another story. He'd urged Logan to dispose of it. Dispose. Patten knew where his friend was coming from. He knew the helpless look in his eyes every time he came back home from the battlefront, despite how much he tried to hide it with broad smiles. But Verge had looked just as helpless lying on that cot. Roman had told them all the stories of the demons from the forest. Patten had finally seen firsthand how monstrous they could be. Yet for all of that, the injured Fae had clung to Thomas as if the boy were a teddy bear. He'd sobbed the same way Thomas had after losing his parents. He'd begged to hold on as Thomas was wrenched away, begged like those who'd tasted sunlight for the first time only to be shoved back into the dark. Patten had stood there questioning what he'd been taught as wrong and right. He'd stood there as he watched the Fae's bandages soil in fresh blood, the shock from the enchanted circle proving too much for someone who'd been so close to death's reach. Was Patten supposed to raise his sword against that? And that had given Thomas enough time to make it back to Verge and seal the deal. Patten didn't know what to think after that. Roman blamed him, and maybe he was right to. Maybe Patten blamed himself, too. Patten spent the following days around Thomas. No one had told him to resume his usual schedule, so he stayed by the prince's side. Every time Thomas's eyes glowed, or a shadow snaked out of his skin, Patten prayed to God that he hadn't messed up so completely. Thomas didn't deserve to pay for any of their mistakes. But the child was happy. Happier than he'd been in weeks. Patten held tight to that. And today, Patten sat with Thomas and his uncle and aunt. Thomas had been feeling rather energetic today, and Prince Larry attempted to settle his nephew down with a bout of storytelling. On the second day, nothing happened. But on the third day, a face reflected in the water. Larry spoke. A delighted smirk danced on his face. Roman could spin a good story, but Thomas's favorite storyteller would always be his uncle. "What did the traveler do?" Thomas gasped. The traveler stopped by the lake and listened to the spirit. It told him, "Sir, I am not a fish. Stop trying to feed me breadcrumbs." Dot smacked her husband's arm. "That's not how the story goes, Larry." "How do you know? You've never heard this one." "I know 'cause you're doing that thing with your eyes." "What thing? I don't do a thing." Patton and Thomas laughed at their typical lapse of bickering. Eventually, though, Patton noticed Thomas had stopped paying attention. He stared into the air, lost in deep thought. "What you thinking about there, kiddo?" Patton asked. Thomas didn't respond. His head remained slightly tilted, eyes glazing over and mouth hung a little open. "Thomas?" He tried again. He reached out to touch his shoulder, but Thomas sat unfazed. "What's wrong?" Larry asked, cutting the bickering off faster than they'd normally let it get on. "Is he having one of his, episodes?" "I don't know," Patton said honestly. He leaned forward, moving to position himself right in front of Thomas. Thomas came back to himself, but just barely. He jumped to his feet, and before Patton could do anything more, he pulled away and began pacing the room. His head turned in this and that direction, as if searching for something, but his eyes didn't lose the glaze. "Thomas?" Patton called. He debated whether he should pick the prince up and take him to Logan and Remy, or if he should wait it out, maybe ask Larry and Dot to go get the others. Thomas's pacing increased, never taking the same route, going around the coffee table, the sofas, until finally he fled to the corner by the window. He faced the wall, hands knocking at the paneling rapidly. Tap, 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 tap. "Thomas, baby, you need to talk to us," Dot tried, approaching him. She froze a few feet away when the space around Thomas began pulsing. A black veil had fallen over him, and it pulsed in increasing intensity. "Honey, go get Logan," Larry told her. Thomas stopped tapping suddenly. "Oh," the boy let out quietly. "He's awake." The stretch of his shadow on the floor darkened to pitch. A white hand burst out of the middle of it, claw-like nails scrabbling for purchase on the floor. "Dot, go now," Larry said. Dot took a shaky step back, then another. She kept the pale hand and emerging arm in sight until Patton stood between it and her. Only then did she turn and run from the room. Shouldn't you strike it first? Before it," Larry whispered. And Patton could hear the fear he bravely swallowed down. Sword drawn, Patton stood his ground, not daring to inch closer. "I can't risk anything that'll hurt Thomas. Remy said they're bonded." "What do we do then?" Larry asked. His eyes widened more when another hand popped out. "Try to talk with him, I guess," Patton said, trying his best to sound sure of himself. "We were able to talk to him before, but we don't know what state he's in now." The rest of the second arm rose up, the new hand struggling to grip at the floor rather than sink back into the shadow. The top of a dark head bobbed up into view. "Get behind me." Patton spoke soft but sharp. Larry stepped back as silent as he could. The Fae was half made of shadows himself, his body reforming into a humanoid shape. His head twisted back, and Patton saw one purple eye fluttering sluggishly. Thomas stood staring at the wall the entire time. Patton didn't have the magic to help him here. He wasn't the most experienced of soldiers. He just followed his instincts and stayed still, letting the Fae find himself again. Verge crawled up out of the dark pond and fell against the floor with a half-grunt, half-growl. He hissed, head shaking and black locks of hair flopping around. He kept his face ducked down, but when enough of his body had reformed, Patton noted that he wore the same clothes he'd been wearing when he disappeared into Thomas. That is, a black set of pants and the soiled bandages wrapped around his chest. Verge coughed once, twice, body shuddering. He fell to his side before flopping onto his back. His breathing came heavy, eyes dazed. Thomas finally turned around. His brows furrowed and he searched the ground. His gaze locked onto Verge on the floor. Patton carefully kept watch as the prince shuffled over to stare down at the Fae. Verge tilted his head, bangs falling into his eyes as he stared back. Thomas frowned, serious. "That was weird." "What?" Verge asked, and it was clear as day the Fae was confused. He glanced over Thomas and then over himself. He stared at his own hand uncomprehendingly and then patted at his chest. "What?" he said again. Thomas's frown broke into an amused giggle. "You took a really long nap." "Thomas?" Verge asked, raising his head up a bit, eyes squinting in disbelief. "Now that you're awake, can you play games with me?" Verge's head plopped back down. He groaned. "What happened? Is this death? Am I dead?" Thomas laughed again and knelt down beside him. He pushed at his arm. "You're not dead, silly. You just woke up." Verge began to say, but he caught sight of Patton. Patton by this point had lowered his sword. "What are you doing?" Larry hissed from behind him. "I don't think I need this," Patton said, then made it clear he was addressing the Fae. "Do I?" Verge faltered, and what a wonderfully human expression he made. It settled the clamor in Patton's heart. "What happened to me? What did you guys do?" "Us?" Patton couldn't help but chuckle. "Do you not remember?" "Remember what?" Verge said cautiously. It's daytime. How long has it been?" "A couple weeks, give or take some days." "You've been sleeping really long." Thomas nodded. Did I not die then?" Verge asked. He blinked in realization and scratched off the bandages. Underneath, the skin showed only the lightest of scarring. The wounds had completely healed. "You made a deal with Thomas," Patton pointed out. Again, Verge reacted in bafflement. "I did?" But this time he sat up on his elbows to stare at Thomas, memories processing. I did. You said—" "I said you could stay if you got better!" Thomas cheered and launched himself at Verge. His arms squeezed around the Fae's neck, and unprepared, he fell backwards again. His arms hovered in the air uncertainly. "You get to stay with me, Mr. Verge! Isn't that great? You can live here in the castle with us! Oh, Pat, Uncle Larry, can he stay in my room with me? Please? He can, right?" "Just a minute, Thomas," Patton interrupted the excited chatter. Verge looked utterly perplexed, and they still needed to sort this out. "Verge, right? We've got a lot to talk about." Verge opened his mouth and closed it just as fast. He looked down at Thomas, eyes shining in disbelief at the happy child. He sat upright, but Thomas refused to move away, so he ended up with a lap full of 6-year-old. He didn't look particularly concerned about it either. "The deal worked, then," Verge commented, unable to tear his gaze away from Thomas. "I didn't think it would." "Why not?" Thomas questioned. Verge shrugged. "Things don't usually work out for me." The sound of racing footsteps approached the room. Patton didn't want to let the Fae out of his sight enough to look behind himself, but he heard Larry exclaim, "Remy, where's Logan?" "On the way, hopefully?" Remy huffed from his sprint. He stepped up beside Patton, ignoring his father's warnings. "So you're back, Mr. on the verge of giving me a heart attack." Meanwhile, Verge completely ignored Remy's dramatic entrance. That or he was too far gone in the realization that he had survived. He was too busy hugging and rocking Thomas happily while the prince giggled. "Don't just ignore me, sis!" Remy yelled and marched up to the Fae. Patton raised a hand to perhaps stop him, but there was no stopping Remy when he was on a warpath. He grabbed the Fae by one of his elongated, pointed ears and tugged harshly on it. "Pay attention to me when I'm chewing you out!" "Ow!" Verge growled, but rather than react with any kind of violence, he yanked his head away and held Thomas closer, angling his body away from the rest of them protectively. He leveled an unhappy stare at Remy. "What do you want?" "What do I want?" Remy nearly screamed. "How about an explanation? Do you know how worried sick we were about Thomas after you pulled that stunt? Now spill. I want to know all the dirty little details of your little deal." "I get to stay with Thomas," Verge grunted, head turned away petulantly. "That's all there is to it." "Not when you crawl out of his shadow like a creepy cookie," Patton commented. Verge blinked and then looked at Thomas and around the boy. "Did I? You don't remember? It just happened. I mean, it's kind of blurry. I just woke up and it was dark, like I was floating in water." Remy got frustrated again. Patton watched them argue, watched the way the uncertainty had yet to leave Verge's expression, and how he held Thomas like a teddy bear once more. "Did you know what would happen?" Patton interrupted. Verge glanced over at him over the top of Thomas's head. He'd taken to half hiding his face in the curly hair there. It was admittedly a sweet image. Patton couldn't help but smile just a little. "When you made the deal, did you know that was going to happen? That you would merge with Thomas?" Verge hummed, brows pinched contemplatively. I just wanted to stay. I didn't think much past that. So, no, I didn't know it would happen after we made the deal. How could I when I didn't even think I'd live long enough for it to work? I don't remember anything after it was sealed. Thought I fell into the last sleep." "Is that possible?" Larry asked from behind Patton. "For a Fae not to know the outcome of a deal they made?" Patton wanted to say that he didn't know, that there wasn't enough information on deals with the Fae, only that you were never to initiate one with them, lest you lose more than you gain. But at that time a familiar cloud of midnight blue formed in the room. Patton noticed Verge flinch back toward the wall with Thomas, lips pulled back in a threatening snarl at a potential enemy. "I assume you're at least having a somewhat civilized conversation, seeing as no blood has been spilled." Logan's collected voice washed over the room as he stepped out from the cloud. The portal disappeared behind him and he stood tall. Although he would appear calm to others, those that knew him would know how tense he held himself. "You're late," Remy noted, hand on hip. Logan's tone turned downright monotone. "At this rate, I'll never leave the castle." Patton kept his attention on the Fae. Verge didn't move to attack, but he didn't relax either at the sight of the wizard. "Verge, he won't fight if you don't. You don't want to fight, do you?" Verge glanced between him and the wizard before shaking his head. Thomas popped his head out of the protective cage of Verge's arm. "No fighting! We're friends. Friends don't fight." "Oh, you naive summer child," Remy remarked. "But he's not doing anything bad," Thomas argued. He turned to Logan. "Please, Logan, Mr. Verge isn't doing anything bad." "That remains to be seen," Logan said. "I don't think he even knows what he did, really," Patton told him. At Logan's questioning look, he elaborated. "The deal. He said he didn't know what would happen after he made it. I guess the whole staying with Thomas point was a broad condition." "Truly?" Logan asked the Fae. "You made a deal with His Royal Highness, unaware of what would follow?" Verge cleared his throat and answered, "Yes, I didn't know what would happen after I made the deal." "You had no idea that you would bond yourself with him." "I just said I didn't know." "How was that possible? You are a Fae. How can you be ignorant of the consequences of your own deal-making?" "I don't know, okay?" Verge shouted. He recoiled afterward, eyes widening at his own aggressiveness. Upon seeing that no one would strike him, he lowered his voice. "I've never made a deal before. I never wanted to. And yet you did with Thomas." "I just wanted to stay with him," Verge said, and his head slumped down to rest on top of Thomas's. "I have nowhere else to go. Hate me all you want, but he doesn't. I wish to stay by his side." Thomas seemed absolutely delighted by the idea. He started rambling to Verge about all the things they could do together now that he was awake. Thomas could show him all the coolest spots around the castle, and they could watch the cooks make cookies, and they could visit the library and read stories together. And Verge looked like he wanted nothing more than to do all of that, if the smile of contentment on his face was anything to go by. "Logan," Patton called to him, "I think we should give him a chance." "As in let him remain here at the castle," Logan reiterated. "I'm sure all of Selbion will be at ease when they find out we're housing a Fae and he's attached to the hip with the prince. Roman especially will be happy to hear the news." "Well, Roman's just going to have to get over it," Patton said with a grin. "Trust me, I can feel it in the bones of my heart that this is the right thing to do." "Your heart does not have bones, Patton." "If he stays, he's not running around shirtless everywhere," Remy commented. "That's just wild boy tacky." "Remy, we're talking about letting a Fae stay here." "Yeah, I know. I've got eyes," Remy said. Then he snickered. "Wait, actually I don't have eyes. You get what I mean. Verge here did save a lot of us against a Fae invasion, and I don't think he's a threat, really, just an idiot." "Hey!" The Fae in question seethed for a moment before glancing at Thomas. "Okay, that's a little fair." "I say he can stay. And don't look at me like that, Pops. Your son knows what he's doing." Larry shook his head and rubbed at his face. "Your mother's going to pitch a fit. At all of us." "Nothing new," Remy chuckled. "But yeah, seriously, you need actual clothes. Probably a bath, too. Do Fae even wash their hair?" "Not an animal," Verge grumbled. And with that, they'd fallen into agreement. Verge would remain there in the castle. The Fae War will continue for decades to come. The blind prince will become king out of necessity. For years, Selbion will hold fast against the encroachment of the Fae. And when old enough, the true heir will take his rightful place after his cousin graciously abdicates. People will gossip about the rumors of magical power the king possesses, not granted by birth, but through fairy dealings. They will speak of the shadow that follows him wherever he goes. And more than that, they will praise him for years to come after he ends the Fae War. but that's another story entirely. The end of If You Have Nightmares, We'll Dance on the Bed by Lefay, Strent. Thank you for listening.